Hello, I'm Archie Luxury, and today I'd like to talk about taking quality photos of your watches and watch collection. And I'm a huge luxury watch fan, and I've come to photography to help share my passion for my watches with my YouTube audience. And I've had a lot of criticism. People have said to me, "Hey Archie, why do you fucking put together slideshows? You know, your shitty fucking slideshows." Well, the reason for this is that the quality of single shot photography is always going to be better than actual moving footage. Like if you're taking video footage, it's always going to be inferior to proper single shot photography. And I don't care what anyone says, single shot photography is the art. Moving pictures, video is, yes, it is good, and I use a bit at times, but really, to get good shots, you need to have single shot photography. Okay, so now let's get it right. I'm going to put together 5 key points to take wonderful shots. So first thing you need to do is tip 1. Firstly, before you take any photography, you need to clean your watches. And there's nothing worse than you take a shot and you think, oh fuck, there's a bit of dust, or oh fuck, there's a bit of gunk on here. So if you're going to take really good shots, and I'm not saying you need to do this, if you're taking shots, you've got to do this every time. But if you want to get some really great shots, number 1, you need to clean the watch. You got to be a bit careful because a lot of pieces aren't waterproof, and ideally it's best to use a bit of, you don't need any fancy cleaners or shit like that. No, simply give the watch a bit of a rinse, give it a wash with some normal soap that gets the gunk out, and then a rinse in clean water. Now let's just go through that steps. This is actually cleaning your stock. So number 1, if you've got a leather strap on it, you'd want to remove the leather strap. Okay, you would then want to, if the watch is, now it depends, if it's not really waterproof, it's just sort of water resistant, like say my annual calendar, it hasn't got a screw-in crown and it's got points of entry because it's got setters for the different eyes on the dial. So instead of submerging it, you just very briefly give it a wipe over with a damp cloth. You could even just trickle a little bit of mist on it, but be so careful, you don't want water to get in there because that's going to really fuck the piece up, and it's rude. You're looking at a big expensive repair, so you want to be very careful. Then you just I've always take off the leather straps, and what I'll do is I'll actually give it a clean, particularly where the leather straps go in. A lot of gunk tends to collect there, and a little bit of soapy on a toothbrush, a very soft toothbrush can clean out all this gunk. And most importantly, after you've done that, give it a nice bit of a rinse to get rid of any soapy residue. And then for the leather straps itself, I often take the spring bars out, and I'll often condition the leather with a bit of leather conditioner on the leather, just to just make it a little bit nicer. Very nice to put the leather conditioner on, rub it in with your fingers or a cloth, and then let it set, and then rub it off. So it's like polishing shoes, it's a couple-step process. You apply, wipe off excess, let it dry, and then buff nicely. Put the spring bars back in, and if the watch is dry itself, you can assemble, and you've got the piece done. So what I'm really saying is tip 1 to the photography is clean your watches. And if they're waterproof, it's a bit easier. You can give them you can hold it under a tap and, just clean out all the gunk. Again, soft toothbrush, bit of soap is fine. The most important thing I want to stress is you want to make sure, people said, oh, well, how about I just wear the watch in the shower? And people who do that, it tends to collect gunk in the bracelet, which can be quite abrasive. So you don't really want to just wear it in the shower. You're better off to clean it with a bit of soap occasionally and thoroughly rinse it out. So that's the most important thing. So tip 1, make sure your watch is nicely cleaned. Prepare the leather, get it all nicely cleaned, and also once you've put the piece together, use a jeweler's cloth just to get rid of any fingerprints, anything possibly like dust or something. Just you want to have it all perfectly done. So that's tip 1. Now tip 2 is when you're taking these photos, it's always a case of the lighting. The lighting is the biggest art in photography. If you can manage the lighting, you can get really good shots. And what I tend to use is I use a light box, and I find it's best to go out in the day, probably when the sun is starting to set, so 4 to 6 o'clock. I'm in Australia. Use the light box because that diffuses the bright sunlight, and I use the light box, and I have a nice object underneath that I'm photographing on. I often use my watch storage box. It's got a beautifully lacquered box finish there, and it also gives me some shadow and reflection, so I can often play with that. So the second tip is master your lighting, and sometimes it's really good to have a light box. Other things, if you haven't got a light box, you can often hold it in your hand. That gives you it tends to make your pictures look nicer, and it gives you a size indication if you're holding a watch. So that's another thing you can do, but ideally you'd want a light box. You want to do it outside with natural lighting, and that's probably the second most important tip for taking good pictures. Okay, the third tip. Now, it depends how far you're going in photography, right? But realistically, you've either got to go digital SLR, or you go point and shoot type photography. Now, the honest truth is digital SLR is the real art itself. And I'm a Nikon man, okay? I love Nikon equipment. So for me, I've got a 60mm macro lens, and that takes some absolutely wonderful close-up shots. It's like I can put a postage stamp in the full frame, so to speak. Okay, so that's with a 60mm macro lens. If I'm using my 70 to 210 lens, it's no good for close-up because, be honest with you, I've actually got friends, Descartes and Greg Kinder. They're both photography buffs. Descartes has got a Nikon D800E, and Greg Kinder had a D800E, but he sold it and got a D3. That's his dream camera. The reality is I can take better shots than both of them because I've got a fucking macro lens. Simple as that. It's not the body of the camera so important, it's the lens. The lenses are very, very important. And the funny thing is, yes, my 60mm macro lens, it can take great shots, but if you're not going to do digital SLR properly, sometimes the point and shoots, they can take really good close-up shots. So you either do it with a point and shoot, a PhD, press here, dickhead, camera, a PhD camera, or you go digital SLR and you need a macro lens. That's very, very important. So that's what I think the funny thing is that Greg Kinder's got the D3 and my friend Descartes has got a D800E, and fuck, I'd get better shots out of my D80, which is quite a superseded camera, with a fucking macro lens. It's the lenses that make the difference. And yes, if they had 60mm macro lens, they could start to outdo me, but the macro lens is the most important thing in the equation, not the fucking camera body. The fourth tip in taking digital photos of the watches itself it's to really, I find the most, this is a very, very important tip, is to let the piece play with the piece. Some pieces you've got to get used to, they've got an anti-reflective glass. My Breguet is very difficult to photograph because it's got an anti-reflective glass. It's very hard, whereas when I'm photographing my white gold Patek, I've got different play on it. I can zoom in closer. I've got they behave differently, so you really need to treat every watch. You've got to, my fourth tip is you've got to learn that each watch is different, and the way you photograph one watch may be different for another watch. And I find myself with the photos themselves there, you've really got to, you know, each watch has different things. Some of them like a glossy wooden background, other ones like a very with the Breguet I found I get a nice result. I've got a white base. So, you know, different watches behave very differently, and you've just got to learn that when you're taking the photos. So just, you know, give it time and take a few shots, and that's the best way to go there. So each watch is different and they behave very differently. Very important rule. And finally, the fifth tip, and this is an important thing to know. And the fifth tip is simple, is that yes, once you've done your photos, take them back and adjust them. Okay, do a little bit of, even if you use Microsoft Office Picture Editor, that's fine. You want to play with them. You can zoom in a bit, zoom out. You can adjust your photos, and that's, you also can correct them as well. And you find that to get the really great shots, you're adjusting them and playing with them, you can really do some wonderful things. And if you're putting YouTube, what I find I do is that I tend to make a copy of the photos, and then I'll make a small version, because if I'm putting videos together, the big versions, they're too big. You're not going to get that benefit. So reduce them for your software that you're using, and play with, adjust them in a photo editing package, and you can just tweak them just that little bit nicer. I'm Archie Luxury. I hope these tips on photography have been useful, and please, if you've got some wonderful shots that you've taken, please email them to me, and I'm more than happy to feature your photography skills in my program. I'm Archie Luxury. Tell me what you think.